I'm Sam Chan, the Silverstein Chair and Academic Dean of the Shack Institute. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is actually our final public event of the academic semester and of the calendar year. So I just wanted to take a moment before I introduce Stephen, who will introduce the program and the panel, to thank all of you for your support over the course of the last semester. I think as the first of the 2 semesters of Shack's 50th anniversary, this has been a really special time for us. We've been able to do some really amazing programming. We had our Capital Markets Conference, one of our largest ever, just a couple of weeks ago. That's celebrating its 50th anniversary, and that quite intentionally was preceded by our first annual National Symposium of Women in Real Estate, which we actually held right here in this building. And I'm really delighted and proud to be able to share with you that we were able to not only host a sold-out conference, but announce our first Women's Scholarship Fund at that event because of the generosity of all of our sponsors. Very briefly, then, I'll also just mention that this has been an incredible first year and a half for the Urban Lab. Stephen Pedigo, who, if you don't know, you'll meet in just a moment, is the director of the lab. He works closely with Richard Florida, one of our faculty members and a distinguished fellow, to give you an idea of the kinds of programs that the lab has been able to host in just its first 16, 18 months. We kicked things off with Governor Martin O'Malley talking about how it is that cities can engage with the new administration, and this was just heading into the last election. That was followed by the head of the urban program at the Brookings Institution, the mayor of Miami Beach when they were in the throes of addressing Zika, Richard Florida, of course. We held his book launch in this room just a couple of months after it came out. It's really been an amazing first year and a half for the program, and this one I think really captures, today's program really captures where it is that we want to go with the program as we look forward to the rest of the year and how it is that Shack and our faculty can contribute to the ongoing discussion of urban issues. So again, thank you very much. Have a wonderful holiday, and I'll introduce you to Stephen.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. As Sam has mentioned, this is we've been working on the lab for 18 months, and we've had some pretty exciting events. This fall, actually, we've hosted a conversation about inclusive prosperity. We had last month we brought folks together to talk about autonomous vehicles and the impact of autonomous vehicles. And today, obviously, we're talking about the impact of innovation and real estate. And then in the spring, we're excited. We're going to host the Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, to talk about inclusive prosperity and what they're doing actually in Canada, some lessons learned. So we're hosting, I think, bringing together a group of folks that we're really excited about to talk about the events. We thought today's panel was actually especially pertinent given the arrival of urban technology and startups back to cities. It's interesting when you look at the rise of venture capital data, particularly, and look at where startups are going. What we know is that, for instance, like New York City now is the third highest place for concentration of venture capital for startup companies, and so there is this new sort of influx of innovation and technology happening back in the urban core. And with that presents lots of opportunities for development, both in terms of both small-scale real estate development, but also large-scale. I can't tell you, as I go around the country doing the work that I do, how many cities are talking about the idea of innovation districts and building better partnerships with higher education institutions, et cetera. So there's lots of opportunities, and that's really what we hope to talk about today, is the importance of what that's doing to create opportunities, but also some of the challenges that it's creating in cities in terms of divides, inequality, and the idea of particularly issues with displacement as well. So with that, I'm excited to introduce you to our moderator, Hitan Sanami. Thank you for, and as a Texan, I told him I'd probably, as a Southerner and someone from Texas, I'd probably butcher his name, but I hopefully got it somewhat correct. Hitan is the editorial director of the Real Deal, which is one of the country's leading real estate publications. Many of you are probably very familiar with that site. I know I look at it every day, as do my students and many of my colleagues. Hitan oversees the coverage for both New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. Really, three vastly growing sort of gateway cities, and the amount of development that's happening in those cities is pretty amazing. And the site reaches about a million unique visitors every year. And there's if you've been on the site, you know that there's great focus from different types of industry players. And he also writes a weekly column about the state of the market. So please join me and welcome Hitan to introduce our panel and to lead today's conversation. Again, thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Am I all set up with the mic?
Yeah, you're all set.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Have a seat. I'd like to invite my panelists over. Let's make it informal. Join me in welcoming them. Wherever you'd like. So I wanted to thank the Urban Lab for giving us the opportunity to, discuss something that's not just pure real estate. We've done a lot of panels about deals and deal flow and cycles. So it's really interesting and important to talk about where we're going. And a lot of these people here are at the forefront of the movement of integrating technology into smart cities. They've had to work with the city council, they've had to work with the state, the federal level in many cases, and they've also had to work with the developers. So they have a really intimate understanding of what it takes to actually build the projects that will define New York going forward. So thank you to the Urban Lab for giving us this opportunity. So I'm going to start, just introduce our panelists. I hope to not butcher any names, but let's see, I hope so. So to my left is Kate Bicknell. She's a senior vice president at Forest City Ratner. It's one of the leading development firms in New York. They're responsible for Pacific Park, formerly Atlantic Yards. They did the New York Times building at 628th Avenue. And they're also the lead development coordinator at Cornell Tech. Thank you for being here. To her left is Brian Platt. He's the Chief Innovation Officer of Jersey City. That's a very, very new title. And so Brian is essentially responsible for taking Jersey City to the next level, positioning it as a place where businesses can come in and integrate technology in a way that may not be possible in another city. So thank you for being here. To his left, Regina Meyer. She's the president of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership. It's a nonprofit development corporation that advocates for development in Brooklyn as a live, work, play environment, which I think is the phrase du jour at the moment, right? It keeps changing. Now I think it's live, work, play. And next to Regina is Andrew Kimball. He's the CEO of Industry City. It's a 35-acre complex in Sunset Park that is essentially trying to create a very different kind of environment in New York. It is a hub for innovation. It's a hub for commerce. It's a grand experiment, so we all hope it works out. And thank you guys for being here. Andrew, let me start with you. New York it's an incredibly dense city, and it's further along in so many ways that it makes it a little bit difficult to do these kind of projects as opposed to a place where, let's say Shanghai or South Korea, where there's a little bit more of a government sort of directive to get these projects done. Here, it's largely on the private sector. I know there's an interplay between the private and public sectors, but how difficult is it to get these sort of large-scale innovation projects done here as opposed to maybe other global capitals?
Sure. Well, first of all, it is working so far. We're about 5 years into at least 10-year adaptive reuse of the massive complex in Sunset Park, known as Industry City. We have 16 buildings on 35 acres. When we got there 5 years ago, a new partnership came together. We inherited a site that hadn't seen essentially a dime put into it for about 30 years. Like the Brooklyn Navy Yard and the Brooklyn Army Terminal to the south, all of these massive industrial complexes have essentially been abandoned post-World War II. The three of them combined, 14 million square feet of space, had 125,000 employees working at them in 1950. By 1990, on 14 million square feet of space, that was 5,000 workers. What is unique and I think special about Industry City is, unlike the Navy Yard and the Brooklyn Army Terminal, it is a full private sector adaptive reuse. So you referenced that. The private sector has never taken on an adaptive reuse of old industrial buildings of this scope without having the lever of housing. So the fact that it's staying commercial industrial is remarkable. And we are just getting started. We had about 1,900 jobs 5 years ago. We now have 6,500, 150 businesses. We now have close to 500 businesses. But we're just getting there, and it is complex. There is a reason that the private sector hasn't taken on something of this scale, and why for decades you saw up and down the BQE signs on big old industrial buildings, one sign in common, and it was storage. If you drove by Industry City for decades and you looked in the window from the BQE, you saw either boxes or vacancies. So we're trying to change that. It's an exciting moment because there is a demand for this kind of space. The Navy Yard really showed that if you create an ecosystem with academic, you understand that what the marketplace is looking for now, there really is an opportunity to turn these complexes around.
But can you stack New York up against, let's say, different cities where this is also happening? Maybe Songdo in South Korea, or Shanghai's 2020 plan, anyone else who wants to jump in. It is good. We're talking about how New York is positioning itself as a city of tomorrow, but let's compare that to other tomorrows across the world.
So unlike big planned cities, I think this is happening much more organically and is in large measure focusing on adaptive reuse with the opportunity to build new around some of that adaptive reuse. I think Cornell Technion is a great example of going ground up.
I think the other thing that, just to jump in, is that what's really impressive about what they're doing at Industry City is that it is, and in the U.S., there's so much more with cities in the U.S., infill, right? So we don't have the same amount of kind of land where in Songdo just a brand new city, or it was just the amount of kind of land where in Songdo just a brand new city, or it was just in Wuhan, China. I'm talking about building a brand new 10 million person. Where there's already people and there's already density, and working with existing fabric, and also doing it in a way that is kind of very people-centered, right, and very inclusive. That is something that I think that that Andrew and his team has been very successful in doing. If you look at what's happening there, that is a challenge, I think, in other international cities about this inclusivity part of development of new towns. If you think about what's happening in Songdo, is it a diverse city or is it mainly an affluent city that's enhancing opportunities with technology? I think so. I think some of the dynamic pieces, I think they're different animals, and I think that what they're doing, which is really impressive, and it's both working with existing density and infill and inclusiveness as well.
Ryan, I want to bring you in because a lot of your job, I'm assuming, is to look at what's out there and see what Jersey City can emulate. So what are you seeing out in the world that needs to be brought to this area in terms of planning for innovation, integrating technology, making sure that it's affordable? I will hit you back with something that I read in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago, but let's start with you.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of elements of cities that we're looking at and saying, okay, we need to go through this and think about long-term planning. So in Jersey City, as with a lot of cities in the Northeast, we're looking at our infrastructure and saying, okay, it's at that point where we need to make some significant changes and improvements. It's been maybe over 100 years since we've done a full-scale audit of maybe our sewers or our water supply. And as we, in Jersey City, we're experiencing this tremendous real estate boom. We're having a ton of construction. Everywhere you turn in Jersey City, at least downtown, there are cranes and new buildings going up. And so what that does to our existing infrastructure, we're still trying to think through that. And I think cities need to plan that with a lot of this adaptive reuse kind of stuff going on. If it was an old city, an old factory from 150 years ago, it's still got that 150-year-old backbone in it that you have to think about long term. And then there's also what comes next in cities. So there's, it's no longer a luxury for people to be connected through their phones and through the internet. And so we need to plan in advance to make sure that we have those amenities. Really no longer amenities. I mean, it's a requirement.
It's just a basic now.
Yeah, that is what it is. But there's also what's coming next after that. So the smart city thing, which I could talk for days about.
How much of a buy-in does Jersey City? So you have this Office of Innovation that was established by a grant from Bloomberg. But besides that, how much of a buy-in? How much of a priority is this project? Is it something where it's somewhat of a skunk works on the side, and if it works, they're going to implement it large scale, or is it something that's already part of, okay, we have these divisions and this is a core part of it?
Well, I think the challenge with smart cities is that there's no great standard definition of what it is, and if you talk to people in different cities, it means something else. And everyone comes to cities and they pitch these smart cities ideas, but maybe they're not. I mean, maybe it's just a digital thing that helps you communicate better. It may not be. The way I see a smart city is it's a city that actually adapts and reacts using technology to challenges that are going on, or reallocates infrastructure or resources in a way automatically without having to have an input, a manual input. And so these types of technologies, I mean, they're new. There's not always a great example out there in a city that we can say, yeah, this is the thing we want and it works so well, or it doesn't work. So there's definitely a big culture shift coming for a lot of these cities that have been doing things a certain way for decades, that are now having opportunities to change the way they do business and operate using new technology that they've never seen before.
I want to pick up on something that Kate said. So I grew up in Dubai. When they want a new project, they just reclaim land, right? It's a little bit easier to do that. However, when they have a new project, we had something with shipping containers. They were overturned and made retail spaces. A lot of the residents around there aren't necessarily thrilled about it because they know it's going to be a very high-end project. Now, there was an article in the journal that I was referring to, which was Sunset Park, Industry City. They're essentially supposed to be enmeshed. They're supposed to be integrated. However, the way that life and work is working out there, the people who go to Industry City sort of tend to stay within Industry City, and there's not, according to this article, it could be wrong, there's not that much integration with the neighborhood. And some people have said, look, I don't have the budget to buy a $12 hamburger or an $18 coffee, which you do offer. So can you address that? And Regina, I'd love to bring you in on that as well.
Sure.
When you have these opportunities, is affordability being left behind, or is it being integrated in some meaningful way?
So I think what's exciting about this innovation economy explosion, and you were mentioning to me before you were going to want to know about office space. So I like to talk about, those old terms to me are really dated.
I don't think they're old yet. I mean, developers
is a mashup.
If I may, the developers. Yeah. I mean, that's what they still use. Office space is still. Sure. It's not. We're not.
But they do, and I work for some of them, so I get it.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, and you saw this at the Navy Yard. You see some of this at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. You really see it in Industry City. You can walk to 10 spaces, and 8 of them. It's probably hard to tell whether it's office or manufacturing. It's just such a blend now of technology, creative sectors. The other thing that's exciting about what's happening is so many of these companies do provide the kind of accessible jobs that these spaces used to provide back in the 1950s. And those were the jobs that went away, the 125,000 to 5,000. And so when you really look at the numbers, you look below the surface, you don't do a superficial look of, one store that happens to sell an $18 cup of coffee, by the way, employing a lot of people in Panama at fair wages. But you look more deeply at who's behind the doors and who's getting the jobs. The reality is there are very good jobs being created locally. So if you look at all of the people in Sunset Park who both live and work in Sunset Park, 20% of them work at Industry City. That's an astonishing figure. If you look at the kind of workforce development we did at the Navy Yard and we're now doing at Industry City, you are capturing folks who need access to the jobs and have the highest barriers to that. So, folks who come from NYCHA houses, Section 8, and repeatedly you see this. So it's easy to point a finger and say, oh, that's just for the hipsters, that's not for us, but when you really look behind the doors at what's happening in these companies, the reality is different.
That's fair.
But talking about downtown Brooklyn, there's a few different ways that we address this, and I think what's really been amazing in the past, say, 5 years is that downtown Brooklyn now has finally arrived as a fully mixed-use downtown. Right? When we rezoned downtown Brooklyn 15 years ago, downtown Brooklyn was known for 2 things: a civic sector with civic offices and a huge court system, and shopping, the dated Fulton Mall era of shopping. Well, that has totally been transformed by not just projects like Metro Tech, which has been there for the past generation, but by a tremendous influx of housing, and about 25% of it affordable. And this mixed-use neighborhood is building on this idea that downtown Brooklyn is a great place to work for not just the civic sector. And so we're finally seeing big changes in innovation companies, TAMI companies, that are starting to come to downtown Brooklyn. Now, obviously, in the tech triangle, we've had great places for those companies in Dumbo.
How do you define that triangle again?
Well, I think that's right. We defined the triangle as Dumbo, the Navy Yard, and downtown Brooklyn. And I think we're all starting to feel like there's much more than a triangle going on in Brooklyn right now, obviously down to Sunset Park and areas of the Gowanus. But what we're seeing is people want to work in Brooklyn now that they're living in Brooklyn. And that integration is really, really what the change has been in the past decade, and I think we're going to see more of that. The lease up at places like Empire Stores, which was really, I think, Brooklyn's biggest story in the past 2 years in terms of national companies saying, I want New York, not just I want New York, and there's several companies from LA and Connecticut, but I want Brooklyn, I want Empire Stores, is a really big story. But we're going to see more and more of that happening with Lafayette 148 coming to the Navy Yard. I mean, we're seeing big name companies come, and that means that we're setting the stage for a much more integrated office environment in downtown Brooklyn.
But we're also talking about the sort of the tech industry coming in and changing the landscape. In some cases, it's sort of, so Red Hook was planning, for example, the project that you mentioned, and also another Red Hook Innovation District, Estate 4, this Italian developer was looking to put something together. Guess what? They figured out that logistics is a better bet. It's cheaper, it was a quicker profit, and they did that. Do you think the trend of this sort of the demand economy, I forget what the last mile problem as they call it, is going to lead to Brooklyn becoming, in a sense, a storage space?
No. I mean, I think the Estate 4 example was very specific to its location. But what we're seeing in places, not just Industry City, not just Navy Yard, not just Dumbo, is those areas are number one, much more connected. Obviously, the growth in downtown Brooklyn is related to our incredible transit infrastructure anyway. That connectivity is just going to continue to grow. I mean, whether or not I just don't feel like Estate 4 is really the example to lead with there. Because what we're seeing is things like 41 Flatbush, which was a warehouse building right on Flatbush Avenue, starting to lease up with companies like Gimlet. MailChimp is coming to downtown Brooklyn, right? These are the bits and pieces that are going to start the ball rolling. And I believe in the first quarter of next year, there'll be more and more announcements of companies. Now, not all of these are headquarters companies. But these are more and more people looking for office space.
I think also the other thing that you're seeing too is that for so long, particularly with Metro Tech has been such a large portion of the office space in downtown Brooklyn for so long, but yeah, as you have more and more earlier stage companies, creative class who live in Brooklyn, want to stay in Brooklyn, they also need space to grow into, graduate space, right? Where you have the more Class A office building, and I think that's what you're starting to see the demand for. Metro Tech has been practically fully leased for so much time, so there hasn't been much opportunity for people to go into that kind of graduate level space, and I think that's what you're starting to see some of the demand.
I also wanted to bring you in on the Cornell Tech project. How did that happen? What were the sort of the key motivations behind it? Is it to get a first look at the next Facebook, the next Google, or was there? What else did you have? I mean, it's obviously a great incubator for talent. You're going to be able to pull talent into not only your company, but there's so many opportunities. But how did that come about, and what sort of benefits have you seen so far?
Yeah, so the origin of Cornell Tech was certainly Mayor Bloomberg and his team's initiative to hold, coming out of the economic downturn of 2008, 2009, how to diversify the New York City economy so it's not as dependent upon the financial sector. And when he and his team at that time were speaking with those who were in the tech sector, kept hearing over and over again a pipeline of talent, that New York doesn't have the same type of pipeline of talent that San Francisco and the Valley have. So essentially his team was like, well, we've got land and we've got financial resources. And so holding an international competition, getting stronger interest and response than they had ever hoped to achieve, really looking at build a graduate level applied science campus in New York. As it came down to a competition between Stanford and the joint venture between Cornell and Technion, and Cornell was able to win, they immediately turned to the private sector. Google stepped up, offered space in their headquarters to get it up and running. And so when it opened this fall on Roosevelt, the new campus with 3 new buildings all open simultaneously, they were able to start there with essentially a student and staff faculty of about 400 people, 300 master's students, graduates, PhDs. And that's what it is, all graduate level, but really with a fundamental ethos of Cornell Tech being about how do you bring industry and academia together with a very specific focus on spurring innovation and the commercialization of new products and technologies. And I think that's really unique in a university, in an education system, thinking about what's the future of graduate education, what is the next model, and how do you incorporate a recognition that to attract the top talent from faculty and students that you need to engage the private sector, and for companies looking at how do they, in this war for talent that we are in, which I think if you speak to any CEO of any tech company, they're going to say is their single biggest challenge. So,
and generally they have to pull in. They're pulling in people from the West Coast and have to pay them 50% more to move over. It's an expensive proposition at the moment.
So I think that's I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. Right? I've spoken to CEOs of tech companies in the Valley who say it's more affordable for them to hire people in New York. Right? So I think that depending on where you are, I think that that's not necessarily the proposition. I think that as we've been bringing companies onto campus and doing it in a very intentional manner where we're focused on what are the areas of expertise that Cornell has from a programmatic point of view, security and privacy, health technology, et cetera, and looking for those companies who can kind of leverage the resources that Cornell Tech has and mutually can turn around and provide the greatest opportunity for collaboration for the grad students and faculty at Cornell Tech to kind of create this mutually beneficial environment. I think what we're seeing from companies is looking at inside track to access to talent. We're thinking about, if you take 2 Sigma as an example, right, what they're locating there, a collision lab. So one is they're going to be locating, they have 2 Sigma investments. So a portion of their team that focuses on investment opportunities will be located there. So that is looking at what's the next great startup coming out of Cornell Tech, which finally actually had its first exit just a few weeks ago, which was exciting.
What was the company?
So they haven't announced it yet. So I'll.
We have some reporters in the audience.
But the other, looking at investment opportunities, access to talent, and the third piece is looking for opportunities for collaboration and R&D, right? How can you bring in-house innovation, whether you be an earlier stage company working with grad students and faculty at Cornell Tech, or a later stage, more established company and with an innovation team or R&D team. So I think that the 3 different parameters that you're looking at there for companies who are really kind of seeing the value proposition of being there are those 3.
Can I just build on because I think given this panel is about innovation, I think there's nothing more important for the future of innovation in urban areas in New York City than this integration of academic and commercial industrial. Like, that is the future. And, you know, Cornell is probably the most important economic development project in my lifetime in New York City. But we need to replicate that. We need to do it at the CUNY level to make it perhaps more broad and accessible. So one small example of that, the Navy Yard that was a big success, was bringing Brooklyn College Graduate School of Cinema and embedding it in Steiner Studios there. So that just that physical proximity to where the commerce is happening and the teaching is happening is so critical. We, on a small scale, have started it with CUNY City Tech and with NYU Tandon at Industry City, but where you may have read, we're going through rezoning, again, not for housing, but for more commercial industrial flexibility. But one of the key items in there is 600,000 square feet of academic. And this kind of model needs to be replicated all over the city, because that is the future of the economy and it's the future of the equity question.
And I think that's a critical point, to go from the sort of the elite to the thing that every New Yorker can embrace, right? The CUNY level, I think, is just super important.
And that's exactly what's happening in downtown Brooklyn with NYU. Because NYU's new investment on J Street is going to not just transform Willoughby and J Street, a corner that has long been a sore thumb for all of us who work in downtown Brooklyn, but that level of investment and attention to bringing not just the growth of the engineering school, but to School of the Arts and other aspects of the computer world of NYU to downtown Brooklyn is going to change access to not just education, but to business in downtown Brooklyn. So, I mean, our relationship, NYU's relationship to downtown Brooklyn is only going to grow with the phased redevelopment of 370 J Street, and that really is one of the reasons downtown Brooklyn is going to be on an incredible upswing. So we have to get the Shack School Shack Institute to come to downtown Brooklyn.
A lot of the people who make the decisions are here.
So anyway, come talk to me afterward.
Let me just build in on Andrew's point for a second in terms of this trend of bringing industry and academia together. I think you see cities and universities across the country looking at what has happened in New York and trying to, and thinking that to compete, they have to emulate that model. So if you look at, for example, University of Washington did a joint venture with Tsinghua University with MIT of China to create the Global Innovation Exchange. Talking to the faculty here about the actual academic curriculum, how did they do this, bringing together industry and academia. If you look at what's happening in UT Austin, lots of different cities, Carnegie Mellon has had a history of integration with private sector. So I think if you're looking at cities across the country, people are looking at how do you emulate some of the things that are happening here, particularly on the Cornell Tech side.
It's about goddamn time as well, right? You really, you'd imagine New York is it's a leading city in so many fields. It's not really had that academic pull in the same way for technology, right? And it's interesting that it's happening. Andrew, I wanted to bring you in on, you have this 35-acre, I think is the last reading I got, but you have that kind of complex. You've dealt with Brooklyn Navy Yard before, so we're talking really large-scale projects. I wanted to ask about the opportunities to integrate and use data in a more interesting way when you have such a big playground.
Well, let me answer by saying I think in terms of innovation and technology, the single most important thing is broadband and access to high-speed networks. And we invested a lot with the city at the Navy Yard to create that. That's going to have benefits for the next 50 years. At Industry City, frankly, we were very lucky that the backbone ran under 3rd Avenue right down Sunset Park, and we were able to tap into that, and we have speeds as fast as the Google building. But if you want to see this spread out across Brooklyn and Queens, getting access to broadband throughout the city is absolutely critical to spreading the innovation economy everywhere. On a sort of smaller scale, in terms of how we work with our tenants and build the ecosystem around technology, a lot of it is small potato stuff, but that together adds up. Just from simply creating common areas that people want to hang out and collide with each other and business happens, or creating events. We've created a portal where the tenants can talk to each other and share ideas and technologies.
Is a portal like an app?
It is like an app. It is like an app. But outside of that, really what we want to do is create the environment in which those companies that want to create the app want to be there and lease space. And we help them grow in, I think, really pretty unique ways in terms of all of the amenities that we throw at them, from workforce to placemaking to events. Access to capital, a little less, although we make as many introductions as we can.
I guess, Brian, maybe you can take this on as well. WeWork, I think Adam Neumann was talking about, they were analyzing how, foot traffic within their spaces, or at least their bigger spaces, and then they found that there were some dead spaces in the middle. They redesigned them, they tried different things, and just tweaking things based on the feedback that you're getting from whether it's foot traffic or usage of light or things like that. Is Jersey City doing anything like that, or is that something maybe you'd want to do in the future?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting challenges of cities is that when you hear about these case studies of people using data to transform their space or their company, whatever it is, cities also obviously very much want to do this. But gathering that data is often a challenge for cities. What we're finding is, and Jersey City is a good example of this, is when you go around and say, okay, let's look at this data and let's analyze it, let's think about it. There's not great data out there. For whatever reason, there are these legacy old processes that are very paper-based in a lot of cities. And so, Jersey City, like many cities, we're trying to get to the point where we have that data from a lot of different sources that we can then integrate and layer on top of each other and analyze in a way that would help us get to that point. But that being said, there are obviously ways we can get to the point where we're thinking about, how to optimize our, it could be our streets, it could be real estate developments, it could be a lot of things. Absolutely.
And we're using data to really understand what growth in downtown Brooklyn is going to mean moving forward. Just doing the pedestrian counts through 6 different key areas of downtown Brooklyn. We're seeing how City Point is changing life in downtown Brooklyn along Fulton Street and Flatbush Avenue. So, that is a way that we can start calibrating what our services are on the bid level and what we can forecast in terms of people who are considering new investment in downtown Brooklyn. But having that kind of data and no one questioning it, we're just saying, look, this is, these are the indicators, is starting to be very helpful for us.
And I will say in New York, I mean, faced a similar situation in Jersey City until there was a guy called Michael Flowers who worked for Bloomberg administration, really brought a lot of the data online, which then led to so many private companies and public sector really crunching the data in ways that change the city. So you might be the next Michael Flowers. I wanted to bring Regina and Kate in on you've worked in downtown Brooklyn partnership. You've also worked at the Brooklyn Bridge Park. I wanted to understand sort of the key hurdles to developing at the scale that your company does, certainly, and the companies that you're involved with in New York. What are things that you wish would be either improved or go away altogether?
Well, downtown Brooklyn has so many great things going for it in terms of access, location, transit, access to housing. But what we'd want to go away, right, is this barrier of the second city barrier that coming to work in downtown Brooklyn is not a second city.
But that's a psychological barrier.
That is psychological,
correct?
Right?
Let's talk about on the city level or state level policy-wise. Is there anything that you're seeing that is making your job harder?
No, I think that the city and state tax policy on REAP is a big part of the story in Brooklyn. We're all in Brooklyn doing, taking advantage of REAP, and I think, price point has been important for us to get tenants. I think what the city and state need to do is to continue to make sure that those benefits are in place, and if there's any changes that can be made, that would be great too. We were lucky this year that REAP was expanded. I think one of the questions might be moving forward is, as we have more and more companies who are starting in Brooklyn, how do they extend their benefits? The state has been, on a discretionary basis, also really a big player in terms of bringing new leases, new tenants to Brooklyn as a whole. So I don't think those are the barriers, but obviously we need to be diligent in continuing. I think that the physical ground plane of Brooklyn can always get better. I had the great opportunity of building Brooklyn Bridge Park. I actually think that we need to be doing more to make sure that the ground plane from downtown Brooklyn to the Navy Yard, downtown Brooklyn to the waterfront are improved. And we have some really key challenges in the next generation. The Brooklyn Queens Expressway needs to be rebuilt. How does that infrastructure that was set in the urban renewal era get rebuilt to really provide better access for our communities? I'm ashamed, honestly, of what access looks like outside of Farragut houses and Whitman Ingersoll houses to the Navy Yard. I walk from Metrotic to the Navy Yard and can't believe how little physical investment has gone into those neighborhoods. Those are places that are 10 minutes from downtown Brooklyn, 10 minutes from CUNY Tech, from City Tech on Tillery and Jay, and we've done nothing in terms of physical investment. So the partnership is going to be, and is already, a strong advocate of really turning that on its head in terms of the next generation of physical investment.
Kate, same question for you in terms of any major hurdles that you're seeing. You've been through a couple of big projects. I mean, big part of downtown Brooklyn is up to you guys, but what are you seeing, or what would you like to see
and
change?
I think I'll turn it a little bit in terms of thinking about technology and innovation as well. And I think one of the biggest hurdles is cost of construction, right, in terms of what you can do. And so I think that as we can bring more and more innovation into that space, certainly we've been experimenting that, or we had experimented that with modular construction, right? And so that was really a task of really figuring out how can you really bring down the cost of construction and construct at a much faster pace.
But you stopped that experiment, correct?
So I think what the challenge is that frequently it is not frequently not a publicly traded real estate development company that decides to invest significantly in innovation, right? And that is something that we did. And I think that what is often the case is when you're the first to try something big, there are stumbling blocks along the way, right? So we think that, we've demonstrated how it can be done, and we've sold that business because we, as a publicly traded company, have now become a REIT, decided that's not where we need to be. But in terms of the technology, in terms of solving high-rise modular construction and how you can do that, I think that we've cracked the code in that space. So I think that as more and more people kind of experiment in that, and you can investigate ways of not just there, but how else can you incorporate technology into the different avenues into construction and help bring down the cost of construction, I think that'll be important. I think that the other thing in terms of really making New York City a hub of technology and innovation, I think that there's, I think what we want to aspire to be is a city of where when people come and make proposals of, say, instead of how can we become a city of yes, right? A city of yes, and there may be concerns and challenges with that, but how do we take those concerns or challenges that may come along with a proposed implementation of a new piece of technology, whether that be using kind of kinetic energy with how do you use like Atlanta Airport now, can they, their terminals, how do you incorporate into the floor that as people step on the floor, generate energy, right? And so essentially that portion of the Atlanta terminal airport can come off the grid, right? So how can you be a city that can be accepting of all these new technologies, at least in pilot ways? And whatever concerns that may come across, so like let's pilot it and figure out how can we test these different. And so to be a city, right, the state right now, one of the concerns with driverless cars has been that currently there's a state law that says you have to have one hand on the wheel at all times, right? So just looking at how can we as a city and a state become a city of yes, and with concerns, figure out how to accommodate those concerns, but it still allow us to innovate and experiment, I think is something that would be interesting to think
sort of
about.
have a more default open position and then innovate.
Yeah, I'm
and
not
change.
trying to say that we don't, but I think that in terms of looking at opportunities and grow and how do we stay competitive, thinking about that mindset of saying yes to experimentation, I think is something that is exciting to think about.
I experience a lot of that too in Jersey City. So what we find a lot of is that governments from the city level all the way up to the state, they're not as flexible and responsive as we would like to new technology. And one of the things that we try and do in my office is create that environment for tech startups to say, look, we can be your sandbox in Jersey City. If you have a new idea that solves a quality of life issue for the public, just come and test it out in Jersey City. And that's not always the case. What actually we find a lot of them saying is, we try to do this in New York, and there's a lot of bureaucracy, so we'll come to Jersey City and, think about just trying to get a coffee with well, it's no longer going to be Jeff Merritt, the innovation director for New York, but there's just less levels of approval that you would need, and that's we still even run into roadblocks on the legislative and policy side, where same thing with autonomous vehicles, where they're essentially not allowed in New Jersey, but we would love to just pilot it in Jersey City and say, let's put a shuttle or a bus on the street and have it go 3-4 blocks in each direction and just see what happens, to show people, to demonstrate the effectiveness and the safety of it before we can then move forward.
And I think that's where collaborations with universities can come in as well.
Yeah.
So for example, Cornell Tech, one of the central elements of their overall program is what they call product challenges, and where companies and organizations and cities can actually submit these challenges and work with a team of grad students and faculty at Cornell Tech to develop a prototype of something over the course of a semester. So for example, the city of New York put forward a challenge where it was working with a team of students at Cornell Tech of how can you use technology to help the distribution and awareness of resources for victims of domestic violence, right? So how can you use technology in our lives and how to, and so using collaborations with universities as a means to pilot that, I think, is another opportunity that's...
Just add two bigger picture challenges in government that really impact boroughs other than Manhattan primarily and are going to slow down the expansion of innovation, which really wants to be in boroughs other than Manhattan. So the two are zoning and transportation. And on zoning, we have a 1950s zoning code that says industrial has to be here, commercial here, and residential here, when in reality, you can have a blending of those things now under this economy. You don't have the same kind of noxious challenges. If it's well managed, you can integrate those things. People want to live close to where they want to work. That takes a lot of pressure off of mass transit, right? That is key to success long term. And then I would say and we all are aware of this, but our transit system, particularly our subway system, is the lifeblood of the city, and it's struggling. And the fact that we don't have congestion pricing and other things to fund that, the ferry introduction by this mayor has been brilliant. We need to expand that. We need to look at light rail, rapid bus transit, all of those things to get people around and bike lanes, I would argue too. And the bike stuff happening in Jersey City is
I was gonna ask
exciting, and
about
that's a
city
good
bike,
segue.
and it's been a big thing for you. So how's that gone so far? What lessons have you guys learned? There was some talk about shifting some of the depots, but maybe just give us an update.
It's been great. You know, when you think about Jersey City, or any city in general, one of the reasons why Jersey City is so attractive is obviously having the opportunities in New York City so close by, and most people in Jersey City are in and out of New York at some point. So when you think about being able to seamlessly integrate the resources of both cities, it's tremendous for us. It's kind of hard to quantify like how great it is, but you know, we have thousands of riders. We have even though Jersey City is 1/20th of the size of the city bike operation in Manhattan, we still have a lot of use of it and a lot of success with it. That being said, though, the infrastructure component of it, of making sure we have safe bike lanes that are connected throughout the city, that's a big piece too. People aren't going to just ride a city bike just in the middle of the street. We want to make sure it's safe and it makes sense for people to use.
I think that one of the points that Andrew makes is very good in terms of density across the 5 boroughs. That's one of the reasons that we are going to be a huge proponent of increased commercial density in downtown Brooklyn, is because having more people have the ability to work in downtown Brooklyn will get people off the subway before they hit Manhattan. And so there's a more efficient use of our subway lines moving through Brooklyn into Manhattan. That's also why we're a huge proponent of the BQX project and having light rail in the 5 boroughs.
Do you think that's a feasible project, though? I've heard pipe dream used when it's talked about.
Look, everything in New York is a pipe dream until the big decision is made to make it happen. And we all know that new transit in New York City, or new big projects that are once in a generation kind of projects, but having light rail in the 5 boroughs should happen. We've seen light rail be effective in so many places across not just North America, but the rest of the world. Why it's not here is sort of crazy. And the idea that we can connect so many Brooklyn and Queens neighborhoods on an access that has just not served, since our subway lines are all about serving Manhattan, needs to happen.
That conversation about, everyone positions their neighborhoods as 15 minutes from Manhattan, but no one's really talking about within Brooklyn or within Queens.
I think the Industry City example is the best example, because I take the D train down to Industry City from downtown Brooklyn.
I play ping pong there every couple of weeks. It's really good fun.
Tech people like ping pong.
And $12 lobster rolls. But I wanted to move on to...
We'll bring you to the deli next time.
I wanted to move on to, there's sort of 2 monster stories in terms of big tech coming into cities in the last few months. One is obviously Google and Sidewalk Labs and what they did in Toronto, what they're trying to do in Toronto. I'd love to get a sense of if that kind of experiment is possible here in New York or in New Jersey. The other one is obviously Amazon's HQ2, right? I think cities have sort of bent over backwards to try to position themselves as the perfect environment for Amazon to come. We're talking about, I think, 50,000 jobs, 5 million square feet, or even more.
8, yeah.
And it's... do you think New York, there's been so many handicapping, like this is probably the prime city for Amazon HQ2, but if it were to come here, let's do 2 things. One is a scenario in which Amazon does come to New York. How does that transform the city? Or if you want, maybe make your best pitch for New York City to be the next home of Amazon. Or you can just say maybe it's not a good idea. But I'd like to, whoever wants to.
I read the RFP and felt that New York City would be the natural best place for Amazon, and I think one of those reasons is the RFP was carefully written about accommodating growth, about access to transit, and about access to pipeline, all of which, let's be honest, we're probably a full New York room here. We all feel that New York is poised on all of those items. I also think that if a major headquarters was to come to any place in New York City, we have so many places where that kind of capacity makes sense. And I think the city did a great job by thinking about that in areas in both Manhattan, Long Island City, and of course, downtown Brooklyn, the Tech Triangle. I also think that one of the things that we as New Yorkers, and again, I'm speaking to the entire room and including Jersey City here, is that we understand that people don't have to be in closed campuses to be connected. And that's because we have so many major companies in New York City that can work across buildings and work effectively. We do it. Chase obviously has a huge presence in Brooklyn and a huge presence in Manhattan, and that's how they function in terms of their company. So none of us know what's in Jeff Bezos' head. We sort of think that he also got a lot of really great free advice across North America. So that's which is fabulous. He was able to do that. But I think that we're poised to do it.
And people were throwing money at him, and I think the Empire State building turned orange or whatever it was. But what's your take on what New York looks like with an Amazon HQ2?
Look, I think it's fantastic for New York. It'll have a great ripple effect. New York is a pretty big place, though. And so we need to do everything we can do to get it. I would shift the question slightly. You were talking about Red Hook before. Some of these places that, their leasing strategy is the Hail Mary pass, hoping that, these tech companies relocate from California. And, they will at some point, but the strategy of being more organic and local and creating the environment where the small companies will come and grow over time, you're going to get the next Facebook or the next Google. And over time, the bigger companies are going to come. And one of the least talked about, I think, phenomena that's going on are these Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies that are repositioning themselves as digital media companies. And you see GE going to the Boston Seaport. You see United Technologies Corp, coming to the Empire Store. It's incredible. Wish they came to Industry City, but it's awesome they're in Brooklyn. And we got Time Inc., right, repositioning themselves as a digital media company. There's going to be more and more of that happening as well. And
You're also getting MasterCard, which came to Fifth Avenue. They have this innovation lab that they're doing at 155th. It's interesting how they're
making Fifth Avenue cool.
Yeah, I guess so.
Hope springs eternal.
And has anyone been following what Google is trying to do in Toronto? Because I think that's fascinating. Anyone want to speak to that?
Well, I also want to just add a couple comments on the Amazon thing. Yeah. So Jersey City was one of the cities that applied, and we think that we're unsure, I guess, if where Amazon wants to go. I kind of agree with that. That even though you read through the RFP and they list all these qualifications and requirements, who knows which one they really are going to value the most? Are they looking to just bottom line it and just find the cheapest place ever? We don't think so. We think the Northeast has a good play. We think if they're looking to foster and develop the right talent and really give their employees a place where they want to be with a lot of opportunity, this New York City obviously is the spot. And so I think either if it's in Jersey City or New York, I think we all kind of collectively win with just a lot more people, a lot more different types of jobs coming to the area, and a lot more development. I mean, it can only help us at this point. But I think the Toronto experiment is like a dream for me. I think one of the limitations to innovation and advancement of technology is, like I said before, piloting and testing and demonstrating this stuff. And so if you can get a lot of money behind it, that's one of the rate limiting factors, the dollars. And this stuff is not cheap. It's not mass produced. It's an unknown, really. So if you can get it out there and A, test it, but also B, demonstrate how it works and how things can interact and intersect with each other, those different technologies, it then is kind of like the next, that becomes like the ground floor again. So now people say, okay, now we see all this stuff working and how it interacts. What's next after that? That's kind of how you take it to the next level, really get it all out there.
And Jersey City New York, I think land costs are too prohibitive to do that kind of
Absolutely, yeah. So we would love that.
It depends where, but I think the one thing that's brilliant about waterfront Toronto is they can operate at scale. And when you can operate at scale, it allows you to try things from kind of an energy point of view, from a waste point of view, from so many different angles, transportation. It allows you to test things that can be more difficult to prove out the commercial viability of when you're trying them at smaller scales. So the scale of what they have the opportunity to do in Toronto, I think, is tremendously exciting. I think the other game changer is, and this is if you go back to where we started the conversation of looking at what's happening in Korea and other places, is that you have this initiative being led by technology companies, right? So if you look at what's happening in Korea, you've got Cisco, Samsung, Panasonic, and others who are very integral to that testing of the technology into smart cities, to create smart cities. And I think that having a private sector technology company who has that as their lifeblood, helping to lead this initiative, but with people who have tremendous urban city economic development. That's who they are as people to the core. Implementing that I
For a
think
California company, that's a big deal.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I think that's those two pieces, that it's looking at what's happening to Waterfront Toronto with someone who has the resources and the technology, the data and knowledge about what can be tested, because they've been developing some of that themselves. And to be able to test at scale is really exciting.
Fair enough. Just want to ask one more, and then I want to open it up. So if you guys have questions, we'd love to hear them. Just kind of get the ingredients. You've done this. This is sort of the second big, Andrew, project that you're tackling at this scale. What are some of the ingredients that you need in an innovation district? What are some of the softer things that you might need to make it happen? Obviously, scale is one. You had an incredible partnership of the fruit handlers and Schroen, and all these people put this complex together. But what are some of the softer things that people may not think about, but actually end up, a few years in, being essential to the project?
Yeah, I think I touched on a few of them. I would say just from a build-out strategy, being willing to go really, really small. So of our 450 tenants, over 250 of them have less than 1,500 square feet of space. And you can start these companies small, they want to be around each other, and then you grow them, right? And then you give them amenities that help support their growth. So there are very few landlords that are involved in workforce development. We pride ourselves in helping find qualified workers for those companies, because they don't have an HR person. Left on their own devices, they're going to go find somebody who may be commuting an hour. If we can find them somebody who walks to work, it's great from a community perspective. It's also great for the company. It helps them grow and pay rent. A lot of the events we do in the common areas, the portal that we have that connects them to each other, all of those things are critical in terms of them feeling like they're part of a community. And then I would say in certain subsectors, we're really trying to drive focus. So around film and media, a company called Able Cine just moved out from Manhattan, took about 50,000 square feet. They rent, sell, manufacture component parts, fix cameras. And you think about the growing economy, so much of it is just somebody with a camera creates a website, creates an app, boom, they got a company. And so trying to work with them, market what they're doing to create a little ecosystem around them. The same thing with high-end niche manufacturing and design around home goods. So we have a slew of lighting companies. There is the lighting district, the Lower East Side, that probably will be vibrant for a while, but why shouldn't some more of that be in Brooklyn, right? So these sort of sub-sector strategies to help build, ecosystems within the broader ecosystem.
I'm glad you brought that up. You said something about a guy with a camera, and that brings me to something I hadn't thought about until now, which is a lot of what you guys are doing is dependent on a new kind of worker, right? Many independent, sort of freelance, or you see those ads. I forget that company that has those ridiculous ads about hustling. But anyway, a lot of that depends on having the ability to freelance, and a lot of that depends on having health insurance, for example, right? So